Question for Denise and for Jim Lee. Jim, you mentioned something about Singapore and the military, how they'd work with you and how they'd make great strides with knowledge management. There was also another group over in Singapore called ISKM. And Denise, I wanted to ask if you had seen anything in that, because you're a researcher by heart. And they had done some surveys and studies and web things, and you just couldn't get access to it because it wasn't a part of that organization that's doing it. But it was all around building the competencies and measuring the competencies and looking at that. Do you have access to that information?
It's IKMS, right?
It's IKMS.
Information and knowledge. That's the society I started.
Okay, well there we go. Little knowledge sharing here at the table. So with that in mind, maybe that's a starting place to take that plus some other studies. And to Michael's point, how do we bring this together on the board here? We've talked about it. Let's put an action item there in place to say, okay, get a committee together, start pulling this all together, break it down by your different groupings of KM competencies or KM titles or classifications, leaders, managers, workers, or universal people, and just let's move forward and get it to that point. Maybe that's the outcome of this effort.
We looked at that, and we looked at what GW. We looked at all of the different programs and certifications and everything in terms of coming up with a broad set. So yes, the one thing I would say is, in my experience, the Europeans and the Asians are much further ahead of us in terms of practical research. That we are still very much siloed in our research and not taking it to the practical level. I think there's a lot we can learn from them on that field, in that area.
And just to answer your question too, that was one of the things that was on the table that we talked about at the closeout, was where do we go from here? And one of the ideas was that was the governing body. Do we want to establish leaders on each one of these levels, the role, the competency, and the curriculum and the education or the training, and then move forward with it with what we capture here. So that is definitely the next path in pulling that.
We need to strive for as soon as possible. I think my voice is loud enough.
Yeah. That was
to develop a straw man of some of these things.
That's the next direction. We had talked about going to the straw man. It was that we were doing data collection so that we could actually build it on a foundation of collective knowledge. So that's part of what bringing it together here and getting that initial data. By no means is walking out of these meetings going to give you a exhaustive model or something that we don't need to go further. So the only thing we're going to have is a straw man.
This is related to, actually, to the competencies. So I was talking to Jim Lee, and we were discussing, he put up empathy as a competency, and he says, well, you know, that's not, I want them to have that. I don't, and I said, well, you can teach that. You would have to have some courses from the psychology department, right, in order to, you know, for counseling. And those are things that occur as a facilitator. Are you laughing at that? Or?
He said that in his program.
No, but what I'm saying is that if you really want those types of skill, you can also, some psychology courses are appropriate.
Absolutely. And when you talk about competencies, we're hoping that we go down to the level 2, because remember, competencies fit within KSAs. And when you talk KSAs, you're talking knowledge, skill, and ability. And so all of those things have to be identified. So we don't have to narrow it to just a specific and say, okay, that doesn't fit, because you need knowledge to perform certain things as well. So looking at those KSAs and coming up with a well-rounded view of it, some of those will show up, you know?
I want to go back to what Michael said about narrative.
Thanks.
Because I think it's important to know that that word is not just thrown out willy-nilly. There's a reason. When you understand and have narrative competence, you can see the whole picture. We talked about systems thinking and patterns. That's where you learn all the pieces of what comes into a narrative. It's distinct from a story. There are many stories in a narrative. Gosh, there's another point I wanted to make, which is really important. Will it come back to my mind?
context is the content?
Certainly context is critical to it, yes. Well, obviously it's gone. But when it comes back, I'll put my...
Are you having a
yeah.
senior moment?
Never. I never have this. It's that I'm running so fast.
For someone in a PhD program, it's qualitative research that absolutely heightens your awareness of narrative, of patterns, of themes. I mean, it's critical to that. And I find that is the core course.
Okay, now I remember. It comes back to your point about empathy. We teach that when we teach story listening. You cannot tell stories without a listener. And so all of those competencies get enhanced and developed in that process as
Absolutely,
well.
absolutely, absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you.
You know, Annie, just a quick comment about this competency thing in leaders. You know, I don't know how it is for other people, but there's a lot of people working in knowledge management who can spell knowledge management, right? That's sometimes you're very good at what you did before. Now you'll be really good in this role because you can learn, right? And everybody in this room could probably be good at a lot of different things if someone just gave you a chance and then was willing to climb the learning curve with you and teach you and coach you and mentoring. But you can imagine, or mentor you, but you can imagine in the business world, it's also about efficiency. That's why I want competence, because I want to know that who and what are very important to me. But the what I'm getting and what they can do is really important. And that's how, and we measure that through competence and through achievement. So yeah, I can grab anybody off the street with a strong BS degree and a pretty good GPA, and I can probably make them a knowledge manager, but that's not what's in the best interest of the business. That's not the efficiency that I need right then. And I don't think that serves us well as a community, as a discipline, and as a profession. Because if anybody can do it, is it any of those?
Exactly. And to your point also, we don't usually have a lot of time to because the budget for this type of work is fragile. It's not a given, and so the ability to rapidly make a difference and provide value is so critical that being able to determine who needs to be on your team in order to make something happen is just essential in order to continue to drive the thing forward and have leadership support.
I think you both made a good point, and I've seen this over the last 10 or 15 years where we had a lot of libraries. I've collapsed all the libraries into one center for business knowledge. Well, with that came a lot of angst about what happens to my position. I'm a librarian. And it's like, well, you're not anymore. You're now an information professional. And by the way, here's your position description. Here's your classification. This is what's expected. Well, I can't do that because I'm a librarian. And it's like, okay, and here's a list of people's names that you can call for a new position, because we're shifting. So when we see organizations start to shift because the economy is shifting, because the whole knowledge environment is shifting, that's a dilemma, because some people don't want to leave their organization and some people don't want to let them go. And so they sort of move through, as you were saying, they move through the organization and they're really not the best fit for the organization. But they've been there forever and they're really good at what they do, but they're not willing to make that next step with that being empathetic to them, or having that desire or passion. I want to be in the knowledge management environment. I want to transform this organization. I want to be in front of the customers. No, I just want to do reference interviewing and gather data and deliver it to you. That's not what is really works. So we've just seen a lot of them have to go by the wayside because they weren't willing to shift, and because we weren't willing to take action as leaders to say, you know what, it's best to change the organization now. And not too long ago, we dropped 42 people.
But was there a difference between the people that like to work with systems or research and people that like to work with people?
Yeah,
because I think in knowledge
yes.
management, you have to really like to work with a lot of different kind of people and listen to their problems, empathy, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, you know, it's very difficult for us to take researchers and switch them into knowledge management.
It was basically your researchers, your librarians, or what was previous predecessor information professionals didn't want to switch.
Right.
But the people that were business analysts, that had an analytical thinking, problem solving skill about them, like to get engaged, like to share ideas around the table. And when you empowered them, listen, when you empowered them from the chief knowledge officer or the leaders or the directors, and they were being the advocates out there to help a business unit grow and solve their problems, and they were at the table. I was sitting at the table with the head of an organization, a business unit, and I brought one of the very best people, and I said, you're probably not going to come back to Cleveland with me. And she said, why not? And I said, because he's going to make you an offer to stay. And she said, how do you know? I've never met him. I said, because I've already planned this in my mind. And I said, this is where you're going to sit. This is what you're going to say. This is how it's going to unfold. This is the strategy that you bring to the table. This is the value that you bring to the table. She orchestrated that so perfectly, and I orchestrated the questions. The vice chairman got so excited, he just turned, and for a whole hour and a half, forget about the other 8 people in the room, he and her were engaged in a conversation. Afterwards, he said, can she move to New York? And all of a sudden, she's moved to New York, but she was escalated because she had that strategic thinking, that integration. I'm not afraid to go to the table and tell you what you need to do. Even though you're a vice chairman, you need to do this from a knowledge management perspective. So those are the kind of people that you want in your organization that can accomplish that.
And I'm just going to piggyback off of that a little bit, just to, again, food for thought, because and based on my practices, because I am a practitioner and a scholar, but organizations are changing. We know that, okay? So change is fundamental. It's going to happen. But even along with people, see, this is where you get back to those competencies at. If you have leadership or management within an organization and they fail to realize that it is changing such that they're also changing the competencies of their people, then you've got a problem. Because even like if you look back in when we were progressing, and even if we look at like administrators right now, if you go into a lot of organizations, you will find administrative people who are sitting twiddling their fingers and not really knowing what to do. Why are they doing that? Because they took away a lot of their responsibilities. They used to type letters. They used to know Word extremely well so that they could format. They had these abilities. They took that and they put it in the hands of other people. Now, if they had done even pipelines, or if they had done some type of planning to ensure that the displacement of these people, and knowing that basically those same requirements are still there, and looked and saw that we're going to collaborative platforms, and those collaborative platforms actually absorb most of those administrative skills that we needed, then they would have been able to move them into there. And here's the good part. They would have been ahead of the game as opposed to behind it. Because like I said earlier, change, sometimes the impact of change can be more catastrophic than the change itself. So if you go, every morning, if someone wakes up and goes to Starbucks, okay, you drive there one morning and Starbucks is gone. You're going to have 3 types of people. One who's going to totally go ballistic because it's not there and not think that there may be one around the corner, okay? Then you're going to find one who is going to say, for a minute, wow, it's gone. But they're going to go around the corner, all right? And one that's not even going to think about it. So you got to think about those types of changes to people and pretty much know the change health of your organization and how to manage that. Now, part of that to me is competencies within the leadership of knowledge management, incorporating it in the new management style to make certain that we are aware of where knowledge needs to go to facilitate our organizations. And I think that's getting ahead of it as opposed to behind it.
And then there's the other that just goes on the internet and has Starbucks delivered.
And there was something that Douglas said yesterday, though, at the KM conference, the government KM conference, that I was reflecting on, which was the concept of change management when you're changing from this way of doing something to this. So for instance, you re-engineer a business process and now you have a new system in place, and now instead of entering the invoice this way and doing this, you enter it that way and do that. So you clearly, from a change management perspective, understand what the current state is and what the new end state is, and you're moving people from this place to this place.